You are holding a piece of paper, 1 sentence, 11 words, and your hand is completely still. No letterhead, no signature, no explanation for why this particular morning, this particular envelope arrived in your mailbox at Naval Air Station Lemoore with nothing inside it except a reporting date and a location. Yeah, you have been flying F/A-18S for 4 years. You have landed on carriers at night in weather that grounded every civilian aircraft on the West Coast. You have pulled 9 Gs in training and come home steady enough to fill out the paperwork. You have done everything they asked, and now 11 words on a piece of paper are the only thing standing between who you were this morning and who you are about to become. Most naval aviators never receive this. Most of the ones nominated never pass the screening. The ones who do pass spend the rest of their careers trying to live up to the moment they opened this envelope. You have been selected. That should feel like an achievement. It does not. It feels like the beginning of something you do not have a complete picture of. Something that several people in your chain of command know about and chose not to fully describe when they nominated you. There is a reason for that. What happens to pilots who report to Naval Air Station Fallon, to the school that officially calls itself the Naval Fighter Weapons School, cannot be explained in advance. It can only be experienced forward, one day at a time, until the pilot who walked in no longer exists in the same form. You will understand that sentence before this is over. Press to report in. Before you ever set foot on the flight line at Fallon, someone died because this school did not exist. Not one, someone. Many. The classified report sat on an admiral's desk in 1968 for 3 weeks before anyone was willing to say out loud what the numbers meant. The U.S. Navy was in a war. Its pilots were trained, experienced, flying the most advanced aircraft the United States could build. And they were losing aerial engagements at a ratio that, when written down on paper, looked like a clerical error. 2.4 to 1. For every enemy aircraft destroyed, the Navy was losing nearly half a plane of its own. Not because the aircraft were inferior, not because the pilots lacked courage, because the training had prepared them for a war that was not happening and left them unprepared for the one that was. They had drilled for nuclear delivery runs, long straight lines at high altitude, clean, predictable geometry. Nobody had prepared them for a turning fight at low altitude over the mountains of North Vietnam, where the missiles missed and the guns ran empty, and the only thing between you and a kill shot was instinct you had never been given the chance to build. Commander Frank Ault was handed an uncomfortable assignment. Explain why. Fix it. 78 pages, not a report, a verdict. The aircraft were fine. The training was killing them. The Navy built a school from that verdict. One location, a small faculty, a rigorous curriculum designed to compress years of combat learning into 5 weeks of controlled, documented, repeatable training. By the time the war ended, the kill ratio had climbed from 2.4 to 1 all the way to 13 to 1. Same aircraft, same skies, same enemy, different pilots, because a different standard had been installed in them. That standard has not moved 1 inch since 1969, and in approximately 72 hours it will begin to be installed in you. The first week does not put you in a cockpit. That surprises people who have never been here. It should not surprise you, because what they hand you in week 1 is not a flight schedule, it is a map. A map of every way you can die in the airspace you are about to enter, drawn in the precise technical language of people who have studied that airspace longer than you have been flying. You have read classified material before. Never at this density, never with these consequences attached to the margins. The briefing rooms at Fallon are cold and fluorescent and completely without sentiment. The instructors who stand at the front of them do not teach the way your professors taught. They do not build toward understanding. They hand you the understanding fully formed, and then immediately show you the 11 ways it is insufficient. Radar emission profiles, missile engagement envelopes, enemy tactical doctrine accumulated across decades of observation, analysis, and the careful study of what happens when American pilots meet these systems without adequate preparation. You take notes. Your hand does not shake. Not yet. By the third day, something shifts. The information stops feeling like information. It begins to feel like geography. You are being handed a map of a country where every wrong turn has the same destination. You start to understand why the instructors speak the way they do. Measured, precise, no wasted words. Because in the environment they are preparing you for, a wasted word is a decision not made, and a decision not made at the wrong moment is a distance your wingman will spend the rest of his life calculating. Your wrist aches by Thursday afternoon. 6 hours of notes across 4 days. The coffee in the ready room goes cold before you drink it. Nobody complains. Complaining about coffee is not something Top Gun instructors do, and every person in this room is trying to become one of them. By Friday, you understand something the envelope could not have told you. Knowledge here is not the destination. It is the minimum requirement for entry. What they are actually building in you has not started yet. The room is cold. Not because of the air conditioning, because of what is on the screen. You briefed for 90 minutes this morning. You stood in front of your instructor and walked through every parameter with the precision of someone who had spent 4 days, absorbing more classified threat data than most naval officers see in a decade. Altitude, airspeed, entry geometry, contingencies. You had answers for every question before it was asked. You were airborne for exactly 4 minutes before the engagement dissolved in your hands. Not slowly, not with warning. One moment, the geometry was correct, and the next moment it was not. And the 6 minutes that followed were a systematic demonstration of every gap between what you understood in the briefing room and what your body knew how to execute at 500 knots under pressure. Now the tape is running. There is no flattering version of what it shows. The recording does not know your name. It does not know how many deployments you have logged or how clean your service record is. It knows airspeed. It knows altitude, stack. It knows the exact moment you made the turn you should not have made, and the exact margin by which that decision would have ended differently over a hostile coastline. Reardon does not yell. You were warned about this. It is worse than yelling. He asks what you were thinking at 14,000 feet when you committed to the turn. Then he waits. The silence in the room has weight, you answer. He nods once, then he asks the next question. It is more precise than the first. It reaches further back into your decision-making, past the turn itself, into the assumptions that made the turn feel like the right call in the moment you made it. 12 pilots are seated behind you. They are not watching you fail. They are memorizing the shape of this failure so precisely that they will recognize it from the inside if it ever begins to happen to them. That is what this room is for. Not humiliation. Architecture. They are building a structure inside every person in this room that will hold under conditions this room can only approximate. You flew 4 years to sit in this chair. You have never been less certain of anything in your life. That is precisely the point. You understand that now. You did not understand it on Monday. The next hop is tomorrow at 05:30. The aircraft on the ramp across from yours is painted wrong. not damaged, not weathered. Wrong? The color scheme belongs to a country that has never been your ally. The markings are precise, deliberate, researched. The silhouette is configured to replicate the performance parameters of an adversary jet down to the thrust-to-weight ratio and the radar cross-section profile. Everything about it is wrong. That is the point. The pilot climbing into it this morning spent 18 months learning to think like someone who wants to kill you. Not studying, not reviewing doctrine in a briefing room, inhabiting it. The way a method actor does not play a role but becomes one until the mannerisms are no longer performed but automatic. She does not fly like an American naval aviator. She does not think like one. She exploits the openings your training instilled in you because she has spent 18 months cataloging exactly what those openings look like from the other side of the engagement. In this exercise, she is not your instructor. She is your core threat. There is a moment in every engagement. She will tell you if you find the right moment to ask when something changes. Early in the course, the student is reactive, predictable, making the errors that inexperience makes and making them in the sequence that inexperience always produces. That student is manageable. She knows exactly where he is going before he does. But occasionally, somewhere around week 3, a student stops reacting. He starts imposing. The geometry of the fight begins to shift in a direction she did not set. The errors stop coming in the expected sequence. The engagement becomes something she has to work for instead of something she is simply executing. When that happens, she knows the exact second it does. She does not tell the student, she files it. Because that moment is not the end of something. It is the beginning of a different question entirely. That is the moment Top Gun is actually looking for. Not the pilot who survives the course. Not the pilot who improves the most. The pilot who at some point in week 3 or week 4 stops being a student inside the engagement and becomes something the engagement has to account for. You do not know yet whether you are that pilot. You will know by the end of next week. There is a door in the sky. It opens for approximately 1.8 seconds under combat conditions. It does not announce itself. It does not repeat. And it does not care how well you flew the intercept that put you in position to reach it. This is the part of the curriculum that rarely appears in any public account of what Top Gun actually teaches. Not because it is hidden, because it is almost impossible to explain to someone who has never stood at the edge of it. You can fly a geometrically perfect intercept. You can outmaneuver every adversary aircraft in the training inventory. You can walk out of every debrief able to articulate with surgical precision exactly what happened and why. And every single one of those achievements becomes operationally worthless if you cannot put your weapon through that door at the precise moment it opens. From the precise position, with the precise radar geometry the missile requires to reach a maneuvering target with enough energy remaining to close. Too far and the physics work against you. The missile arrives having bled the energy it needed. Too close, and you are inside a geometry you were specifically trained to avoid. The window between those two failure states is specific, unforgiving, and it must be hit correctly every time, not in a simulator, not at standard altitude in clear conditions, but at 7 to 9 Gs in the hardest turns of an engagement, while your body weighs 8 times its resting weight. At 9 Gs, your vision narrows. Not metaphorically. The edges of your eyesight physically compress toward the center. The world becomes a tunnel. You are still inside that tunnel making decisions that must be correct. You are simultaneously managing your radar, tracking the threat aircraft, monitoring your fuel state, maintaining positional awareness of your wingman, and processing the data link picture from the rest of your formation. Wrong angle, wrong energy, wrong timing. 3 variables. Any one of them alone closes the door. You remember what the instructor said on Friday of week 1. That knowledge was not the destination, that something else was being built. This is what was being built. Precision that holds its shape when everything around it is trying to collapse. The door is open for 1.8 seconds. You do not get a second attempt. 6 aircraft are waiting for your voice on the radio. They will go where you tell them. They will trust the timeline you set, the target sequencing you determined in the brief, the deconfliction geometry you calculated across 3 dimensions at speeds that compress every margin to fractions of a second. They will trust you completely. That trust is the heaviest thing you have ever carried in a cockpit. Week 4. The scale of the engagements has changed entirely. You are no longer flying 1 versus 1 against a single instructor aircraft in a contained piece of airspace. You are the flight lead of a strike package. 6 jets, electronic warfare aircraft managing the radar environment, surface-to-air threat systems populating the picture below you, enemy fighter intercepts arriving simultaneously from multiple vectors. Every decision runs through you. There is no committee. There is no pause function. There is only the timeline, the geometry, and the voice on the radio that everyone in the formation is waiting to hear say the right thing at the right moment. You cross the initial point at 480 knots and 500 feet above the desert floor. The threat radar rises on your warning receiver. You hear the tone. The decision window is approximately 2 seconds before the geometry closes, and the option is gone. You make the call. You push the formation through. The target falls inside the parameters. The package egresses north intact on timeline. For 40 seconds, you think you may have actually done it. 40 seconds. You count them without meaning to. The desert floor is sliding beneath you at 8 miles per minute. The formation is tight. The radio is quiet. For exactly 40 seconds, the world contracts to the size of a cockpit and everything inside it holds. Then Riordan's voice comes over the radio. Flat. Calm, surgical, 1 word, stop. Not the debrief, not the explanation, not the precise airspeed differential and the exact margin of separation and the mathematical account of what almost happened during the egress turn. Just the 1 word, delivered in the tone of someone who has already seen the tape and already knows what it contains. Stop. You will understand the full weight of that word in approximately 11 minutes when you walk into the debrief room and the screen is already running. What it shows will not leave you. Not tomorrow, not when you go back to your air wing, not ever. Your body has been keeping you alive for 34 years. At night, at altitude, over the Nevada desert, it will try to kill you. Not out of malice, not out of failure, because it does not know where it is, and it will not tell you that it doesn't know. It will simply generate a feeling of certainty so complete and so convincing that every instrument in the cockpit will seem to be the thing that is lying. Week 5. The schedule shifts to nights. The desert floor below, NAS Fallon, goes completely dark for miles in every direction. There are no road lights, no city glow on the horizon, no reference point between the ground and the sky except the stars above your canopy, and stars are not a horizon. Your vestibular system, the biological equipment in your inner ear that has correctly told you which way is up for your entire life, is now receiving inputs it was never designed to interpret. It is doing its best. Its best is systematically wrong. The horizon feels real. Your body insists on it with the same quiet authority it uses to tell you that the ground is down and the sky is up. The instruments say something different. One of them is lying. You have to choose which one to believe every time, without hesitation, while simultaneously flying a low-altitude navigation route at high speed, hitting timing gates measured in seconds, tracking an adversary aircraft through the forward-looking infrared pod, and managing an approach profile that ends on a runway configured to replicate a carrier deck moving through the ocean. You trust the instruments completely. You trust nothing else. This is not a philosophy. It is a survival decision made once, permanently, before you ever leave the ground. Because the pilots who have not made that decision permanently are the ones who drift back toward what their body is telling them at the moment their attention shifts. Spatial disorientation does not announce itself. It finds the gap between one instrument scan and the next, and it fills that gap with a feeling of absolute certainty pointing in the wrong direction. After the first successful night hop, you sit in the cockpit while the engine winds down. You do not move for 11 seconds. You count them because you can. Because you are still here to count them. If this is the kind of content that stays with you, subscribe. We build these for people who want to understand what excellence actually costs. And what it costs is everything ordinary about the way you used to think. Nobody asks what happens to the instructor after the debrief ends. After the students file out and the screen goes dark and the room returns to the particular silence of a place where difficult things have just been said with precision. Nobody asks because the instructor is the one with the answers. The instructor is the standard. The instructor does not have a version of this experience that requires examination. That assumption is wrong. The instructor carries something the student does not. The student's errors belong to the student. They are corrected, documented, filed, and never repeated in the same form. The weight is personal, and the correction is personal, and the improvement when it comes is personal. The instructor's errors are different. If you teach it wrong, they learn it wrong. They carry it back to their air wing. They teach it wrong to the junior pilots coming up behind them. Those pilots deploy with it embedded in their decision-making. The error does not stay in the debrief room. It multiplies outward through every squadron in the fleet, through every carrier air wing, through every flight deck in every ocean where naval aviation operates. You are not setting a standard for one pilot. You are calibrating the instrument by which everyone else will be measured. This is not education. Education can be corrected in the next lesson. This is architecture. What you build in the pilots across that table will be load-bearing in situations you will never observe, in airspace you will never enter. At moments, that will happen years after you have rotated out of Fallon and moved on to the next assignment. The weight of that does not stay abstract once you fully understand it. It arrives one evening quietly when you are reviewing a tape alone after everyone else has gone home. When you identify not the student's error, but the moment in a previous debrief where you let something pass that you should have caught. A small thing, a half degree of imprecision in a concept you allowed to stand, because the session was long and the correction felt marginal. It was not marginal. You correct it the next morning. You do not let it pass again. That is the moment the student who reached that inflection point in week 3, the one who stopped reacting and started imposing, begins to look like a future instructor. The chain does not break. It extends. Somewhere tonight, another pilot is holding an envelope. 1 sentence, 11 words, and their hand is completely still. They do not yet know what the next 5 weeks will remove from them, the certainty they arrived with, the version of competence they built across 4 years of deployments and carrier landings and engagements that felt, until now, like the real thing. They do not know that the person who walks out of Fallon will not be a better version of who walked in. It will be a different person entirely, built from the same material but restructured at the level where decisions are made, where instinct lives, where the difference between the correct call and the almost correct call is measured in margins so small they have no name in ordinary life. 1 pilot, 1 class, roughly 40 graduates. Each one returning to a carrier air wing, carrying a standard that radiates outward into every squadron, every deployment cycle, every aircraft that launches from a flight deck somewhere in the world at 0200 with a target 400 miles away and a crew that does not hesitate. Since Top Gun's curriculum was fully integrated across the naval aviation fleet, no U.S. Navy pilot has been shot down in air-to-air combat by an enemy aircraft. Read that again. Not one. 50 years. Every conflict. Every theater. Every night over every hostile coastline where American naval aviation has operated. Not one. This is not a story about talent. Talent walks into Fallon every class. This is a story about what happens when a system decides that failure is not inevitable. When it builds a standard high enough that every deviation from it is immediately visible, immediately correctable, and never repeated in the same form, the standard does not expire. The flight line at Fallon is quiet now. The last tape is filed. The boards are cleared. Tomorrow the cycle begins again with another group of the best pilots in naval aviation sitting in those chairs, holding themselves against a standard that started with a failure in the skies over Vietnam and has not moved 1 inch since the day it was set. Somewhere tonight, another pilot is holding that envelope. Their hand is completely still. They have no idea what is coming.